of the most important molecules that we have are lipids, or fats. So this is taken from your Nelson textbook, page 33 to 37. You're going to answer page 38, 1 through 7 as well. You may have answered 1 through 3 here already. They deal with carbohydrates. So what are fats? Fats are also known as lipids, and they're hydrophobic. And the reason why they're hydrophobic is because they're made up of long carbon chains with hydrogens attached to them. And these are all nonpolar bonds, and because they're nonpolar bonds, it makes this molecule nonpolar, which means it won't dissolve in water. It will only dissolve in oil or fat itself, right? Like dissolves like. When we talk about lipids, we're talking about 3 or 4 types: fats, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes. We're going to talk about each one in this video. They are energy dense. For every gram of fat, you have 9 calories of energy compared to a gram of carbohydrates, which just has 4 calories. So if you eat the same mass of food and it's really fatty, you're going to get a lot more energy from that food. It's really energy dense. Because of this, animals primarily will store their long-term energy storage in the form of fat. It's also used as a cushioning for around certain tissues as a form of protection. But more importantly, it's used as an insulation, particularly animals that are way up north and it's very cold. They'll have a lot of fat around their body, and that acts as a form of insulation. So animals convert excess carbohydrates into fat and store that fat as droplets in cells of adipose tissue or fat tissue. So if you eat too much sugar at Halloween, you're going to store that energy. Sorry, if you eat too much candy at Halloween, what will happen is you'll store that energy in the form of fat. As you have enough carbohydrates in your system, convert that stuff to fat. Fats are known as triglycerides. So the glycer part refers to glycerol, okay? So glycerol is this molecule right down here, and if you notice, it has 3 hydroxyl side groups. So it's like an alcohol. It's got 3 of them, and it combines with something called a fatty acid. And a fatty acid is just a hydrocarbon chain, lots of carbons and hydrogens, and at the end you have a carboxyl or an acid functional group. And if you take 3 of these acids and combine them with the alcohols, you remove the water, you get an ester. And an ester, so you've got 3 ester functional groups here. This is a triglyceride, and it's got 3 ester linkages in it, and that is what a triglyceride is. This is the primary form of energy storage of fat in your body as these triglycerides. If you eat a fatty meal, if you eat meat, you're going to be eating a lot of triglycerides. It's very energy intensive because it's got 16 to 18 carbons on it. So this only has 5 carbons. Imagine it out to 18 carbons. Triglycerides are actually really long. They have a lot of energy, and they're primarily nonpolar because of these fatty acids. So saturated fats come from animals. They're long-term energy storage. It provides insulation and protection, and it also helps us dissolve fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamins like A, D, E, and K are all fat-soluble, and we absorb these vitamins when we have fats in our diets. And the thing about saturated fats is they have no double bonds between the carbon atoms in their fatty acid chains. And because of this, they're solids at room temperatures. These saturated fatty acids, they can get really close together, and they have more intermolecular forces. So let's see what this looks like. So here we have a triglyceride. Here is our glycerol backbone, and then here we have 3 fatty acids. So when you eat a lot of animal fat, what will happen is you'll not just eat one animal fat, but you'll eat lots of different triglycerides. So you're not just eating one triglyceride, you're eating lots of them. And if you notice, if I was going to place them all on my page here, they could pack really, really close together. And because they can pack really, really close together, they're going to have some really strong van der Waals or London dispersion forces. These guys are primarily nonpolar, so the only force that they have is this van der Waals or London dispersion force. And as a result, we get tight packing. Tight packing, lots of van der Waals, means that you're going to need more energy to rip them apart, which means you're going to be a solid at room temperature. Now this is different compared to unsaturated fats. Here we have an unsaturated triglyceride. And if you take a look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and stack these guys together. And what you'll notice is that there's actually gaps between these. Now, first of all, what makes this unsaturated? What's different about the image that you're looking at? And if you're really paying close attention, you'll notice that they're almost exactly the same except for one really important difference. And that's this kink. Okay? Now, this is actually known as a cis fat. And it's okay if we don't know what this means yet. But we can see that that double bond causes a bend. And because this causes a bend, it creates space between these unsaturated triglycerides. As a result, they can't pack well together. So they're not good at packing. They can't get close together. And they're going to have a decrease in their van der Waals or London dispersion forces. Remember, those are the forces that happen between the electrons and protons. You need to be close together. Think about a gecko's hand. In order for it to have London dispersion forces against the wall and a gecko to climb, it has to get its hands, the molecules of its hands, really close to the wall for it to be able to get that London dispersion force and make that gecko stick. Well, here we have this unsaturated fat and we can't get it close together, so therefore we don't have good London dispersion force, and we're more likely to be a liquid at room temperature. So if you ever look at unsaturated fats, you'll notice they're like vegetable oil. They're liquids, and that's because of these double bonds, which decreases the packing, which decreases the London dispersion forces. So omega-3 fatty acids have been popular in diets in the past, and the reason why they're popular in our diet is because they're supposed to help with heart disease. And we know that they help with heart disease because we know that fats make up our cell membranes. And we know if you're unsaturated, you're more likely to be a liquid. You're more likely to be fluid than the saturated fat. So that's a real big simplification of what's going on with unsaturated fats in our cell membranes. The idea is that triglycerides do make up and become part of our cell membranes. And they get modified into what we call phospholipids. Now, phospholipids they have fats in them, but they also have this phosphate part or this phospho part. So if we zoom in on what a phospholipid looks like, a phospholipid will have the fatty acid part. So this looks like a triglyceride, except it's missing one of the hydrophobic tails. And that hydrophobic tail has been replaced with a phosphate or a polar head group or a hydrophilic head group, which means it likes water. So we like water on the top and we like oil on the bottom. And when we put these things together, what we end up getting is a phospholipid bilayer, where all the fatty part or the nonpolar part will sit in the middle right here, and the polar parts will stay on the top and the bottom. And this is known as a phospholipid bilayer. And it's called a bilayer because it's made up of a phospholipid on the top and a phospholipid bilayer on the bottom. So phospholipids are composed of one glycerol, just like the triglycerides, two fatty acids, and instead of the third fatty acid, you have a polar phosphate group. And together, they form this phospholipid bilayer. Now, phospholipid bilayer is awesome because it's virtually impermeable. It doesn't let macromolecules pass it, so big molecules can't get past it. It's relatively impermeable to charged ions. Ions have a hard time getting through the fatty acid bilayer on its own. Okay, they need special channels to get through. But O2 and CO2 can get through with little resistance. So this is great. So the important things like O2 and CO2 can move freely, but big things can't and charged things can't. So larger molecules are going to need special carrier proteins that go through, special channels that go through this phospholipid bilayer. Okay? So the third type that we're going to talk about today is steroids. And steroids are hydrophobic molecules. Okay? And so generally they're formed from cholesterol. And so cholesterol is converted by your body into bile salts and vitamin D. So cholesterol is important to your diet, but you do make it on your own. And if you look at all these different molecules here, we got cholesterol, testosterone, progesterone, and estradiol or estrogen, and they all look very similar. because they're all composed of cholesterol. Now, cholesterol is a hugely important thing in your body, and because it makes these steroids, so these sex hormones that you need. And again, we're going to talk about this in the next few units, so we're just touching on it briefly now. What you need to know is that they're hydrophobic, and they're really important to our membranes. So when you take a cholesterol molecule and you put it in a phospholipid bilayer, what will happen is it keeps the membrane just the right fluidity. If you have too much cholesterol, what will happen is your membranes become rigid and inflexible. If you have too much cholesterol, too little cholesterol, your membranes are very, very fluid. And so you need to have the right amount of cholesterol in your cells for it to function properly. The last type of lipid we're talking about is waxes. Beeswax produced by insects, paraffin, which comes naturally from oils, and cutin, which is produced by plants. So the primary structure of a wax is just a long hydrocarbon. So lots of carbons and hydrogens, and occasionally what you'll do is you'll have an ester functional group in there. So you have an ester functional group in each one of these types of waxes. So they're primarily hydrophobic because they're nonpolar, they're huge hydrocarbons. And because they're hydrophobic, they're waterproof coatings on both plants and animals. So that's it for today. You're going to do a couple textbook questions there for me, and then a worksheet for me, and that's it. Send me a message on SB if you have questions, guys. Thanks. Bye.